Thank you. And for the introduction, as you're reading those things, and I think to myself, um, those are accomplishments and accolades, but I don't live off of those, and those don't define me, and those don't make me the person I am. What makes me the person I am is the work that God has done in my life. And through that adversity and the things that He's allowed me to see, the love He's allowed me to pour out in the middle of my own pain and hurt and trauma. And so I've put together this story that I want to share with you about my story with Martin Luther King's memorial, my history with the work I'm doing in the city of North Chicago. And I hope that you'll enjoy it. And I hope that it is encouraging to you and inspiring. And so with that, I am going to start. A catalyst leader brings hope, inspires, is courageous, and passionate for the work they're called to do. This is who Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was. Dr. Martin Luther King's service to our country. I have admiration for the Shalom which Dr. King carried. Dr. King heard a call deep within his soul that gave him the peace to walk out of his house every day, knowing that he may not return. I'd heard of this type of peace from veterans who served in the armed forces during times of conflict. Dr. King carried radical empathy by the way he was willing to sacrifice himself for all the rest of us. I'd heard of this radical empathy from veterans who served during war times, standing in the gap for the rest of us. Dr. King also carried a rich kind of love for those who beat, hated, and mistreated him. Once again, I'd heard of this rich kind of love from Black veterans who served in World War II while in segregated units. They too loved their country, yet were mistreated and hated by the white veterans they were serving with. Although Dr. King never served in the American Armed Forces, he served his country. Dr. King gave his life to make our country more just and free. His sacrifice. By the way Dr. King was treated, we know that there's always a price to pay for truth-telling. But freedom, equity, and justice, we have to speak on these things with boldness and as a fearless people. It's our responsibility to Dr. King, but I know from experience this can be hard, and fear and anxiety will creep in. In Dr. King's book, A Gift of Love, Dr. King writes one of his steps to overcome fear, which reads, "First, we must unflinchingly face our fears and honestly ask ourselves, why are we afraid? This confrontation will, to some measure, grant us power. We shall never be cured of fear by escapism or repression, for the more we attempt to ignore and repress our fears, the more we multiply our inner conflicts." I share this with you because over this past summer, as people came at me on social media, upset and angry over my post around race and policing, it was hard not to take it personally. I admit I was heartbroken. And reading the words they posted, I could feel the hate and anger jump off my screen. It made me sick to my stomach. And for the first time in a long time, I had fear in my heart. People I thought knew me, people I had served and served with in different capacities over the many years of community engagement, calling me hateful, unpatriotic, and even criminal for speaking out against racial injustice. After I wiped those lies right off, I started to have a conversation around the issue with others, only to be met with people who said they were uncomfortable discussing the topic, but comfortable enough to tell me I should not use words like racism and white supremacy because these were trigger words. People who thought it was okay to tell me, "Hey, you're a good person and you're so awesome. I just want to let you know you should really stay away from politics. Never once did these individuals stop to think how their words made me feel or how uncomfortable they were making me with their lukewarmness on these issues. Next, I found myself becoming exhausted and demoralized as I struggled to cope with the state of perpetual grief I and many others found ourselves in. After retreating back to my home, I cried out to God for help. After a few days, I had this peace I hadn't felt in a while. Later, these words kept repeating in my mind. I may not get there with you. I didn't immediately connect these words with Dr. King until I Googled it. That's when Dr. King's last speech given, I've been to the mountaintop, popped up. As I began to read and got near the end and read these words, I may not get there with you, I began to sob. Dr. King is a prophet, a legend, but in reading those words, I couldn't help but think he was also a husband. And when he didn't get there with us, that made his wife a widow. And when he didn't get there with us, that meant his kids were fatherless. Dr. King didn't get there with us. Our brother, George Floyd, didn't get there with us. Our sister, Breonna Taylor, didn't get there with us. Congressman John Lewis didn't get there with us. And after grieving all this, I took myself to sleep. I slept a truly restful sleep. The next day, I woke up with one word on my mind, and that was mountain. Throughout the day, I was comforted by what I missed in the title of Dr. King's speech. Dr. King knew his mountain. Dr. King made it to the mountaintop. His journey for justice was with Jesus. He may not have gotten there with us, but he gifted us so much hope, love, and peace. John 14:27, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. Dr. King's peace was met with murder, but God made sure that that bullet did not stop the movement. Genesis 50:20, as for you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to keep many people alive. Galatians 6:9 reads, let's not get tired of doing good, because in time we'll have a harvest if we don't give up. The words don't give up were an anthem to me during the 13 years I fought for my brother to reach his freedom from a 35-year sentence for a crime he didn't commit. I see do not give up at the heart of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s actions and words. So our job is to take action. We can move mountains as long as we don't give up. Because the thing is, even the mightiest of mountains bends to the will of raindrops. I like to picture those raindrops as our tears. And something else about mountains, the rate at which they grow or move depends on the difference of how fast they are being pushed up or how fast they are being worn down by the raindrops. Now I want to reflect on Dr. King's last speech given before his assassination. I've been to the mountaintop. He talked about the determination of people who showed up that night in spite of a storm. Determination is what I saw over this past summer as millions of us marched for Black Lives Matter. He later goes on to say, and I see God working in this period of the 20th century in a way that men in some strange way are responding. Something is happening in our world. The cry is always the same. We want to be free. The words we want to be free have been in our ear for a very long time. And similar words were chanted by our Black sisters and brothers during the summer of 2020 which had the biggest protest for racial justice and civil rights in a generation. In the speech, Dr. King goes on to say, we've got to stay together and maintain unity. The issue is injustice. We are going on and we need all of you. The words, we need all of you, made me think back to the millions of people who, after the killing of our brother in Christ, George Floyd, answered the call for help and began to march all around the world. Those words by Dr. King, all of you, is exactly who we all saw protesting police brutality with us. Sisters and brothers from all different races, tribes, and nations, answering the call for help. That's a shared cultural memory that will stay with me forever. In this speech, he goes on to say, now we must kind of redistribute that pain. This is significant to me because as a person of color and a woman of faith, I was invited to participate in discussion and listening groups to share my experiences as a person of color. At first, I was reluctant to participate because honestly, I was tired. But then God reminded me of the work Dr. King did. And after praying on it and feeling peace in my spirit, I decided to move forward and have the difficult and painful conversation around how majority culture sisters and brothers weaponize discomfort and how together we need to pray to our Lord that the existence of our Black sisters and brothers will no longer be interpreted as crime. After many months of these meetings, I began to see many majority culture allies helping me and others process the pain and grief we were experiencing, a redistribution of that pain. In another part of Dr. King's speech, he says, be concerned about your brother. Let us develop a kind of dangerous unselfishness. A dangerous unselfishness is what I saw when in the middle of this global pandemic, people put themselves out there to march with our Black sisters and brothers. The speech goes on and Dr. King talks about the parable of the man of another race who came and administered first aid and helped the man in need. Jesus ended up saying this was the good man. Now this stood out to me because as Dr. King mentioned, we use our imagination a great deal to try and determine why the priest and the Levite didn't stop, saying at times that they were just busy going to church meetings, etc. And so one thing that was made clear early on about the global pandemic is that everything stopped. Schools closed, offices closed, churches closed. What the global pandemic was able to do is help us all hear and see clearly the call from our Black sisters and brothers. In the middle of this pandemic, as Dr. King said, we all had to be concerned about our brother. We could no longer use the excuse that we were too busy going to fill in the blank. So what gives me hope? Isaiah 1:17, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. Dr. King's children were left fatherless and his wife a widow. As people of faith, we can no longer retreat from being a force of social change. We have all been called for a time such as this. So what gives me hope? Across the country, local and state leaders are declaring racism a public health crisis and emergency. And as the parable goes, we have to administer first aid in this emergency. What gives me hope? The individuals who go and find the people closest to the pain and start their work from there. What gives me hope? A Ku Klux Klan meetings place and white supremacist store being turned into a community center dedicated to education and fighting against racial injustice by a South Carolina preacher. And there's so many more stories I could go on and on. So what does Shalom look like for me? Allowing myself to feel all the necessary emotions while processing what is going on around me. It's giving myself the freedom to cry and sob when needed, feel sick to my stomach, etc., and not trying to immediately wash away these emotions. This helps me to build myself up for the work ahead because my heart is with those who are hurting, and my action is in the area of prayer, protest, and policy change. As far as my work in the area of justice, truth-telling, and reconciliation, I look at it as a giant thank you note to those who served and sacrificed so much to help us get here. And so what's next for me? Co-leading a Be the Bridge group, which is a racial bridge builder. The curriculum is biblically based, and some of the values that are focused on are confession, respect, grace, and justice. And all that is music to my ears. So I am excited for this new season. And I go in peace, knowing my purpose doesn't just go to work, it goes to love, a rich type of love. Thank you.